I think this is just part of like baking without, sorry, I'm trying to like shake the flour up. Part of baking in non-white clothes or without an apron. Hi, I'm Genevieve, and today we're making orange rolls. And orange rolls are essentially like cinnamon buns with a delicious orange flavor throughout and an orange glaze. But I'm actually going to show you how to make a no-yeast version so that they actually can be ready in under 45 minutes. I'm from California, and for me, winter is citrus season, and it's my favorite season of the year. And I was trying to think of what I wanted to bake with them, and a friend of mine from the Mountain West introduced me to orange rolls in the form of the Pillsbury tubes. Once I got a sense of what they were, I was like, oh my God, these are delicious. They're amazing because they're cinnamon rolls with all this delicious orange flavor and this orange scent. I am not a morning person. I love hosting a weekend brunch, but I cannot wake up hours before to wait for a yeasted dough to rise, and I still want to serve something warm from the oven. They taste best almost hot, but definitely warm, and so you definitely can serve them right away and you can get them made really quickly. The first thing I'm going to do is actually create a sugar mixture that's going to infuse the filling and the dough as well. And what I want to do is zest the orange directly over the sugar. Any of that flavor, that scent, is just going to be caught in the sugar instead of on your cutting board or in another prep bowl or anything like that. So this is my orange brown sugar, and I'm just tossing it so that all of those juicy bits of zest are coated in the sort of moist brown sugar. Oh gosh, I'm always trying not to say moist, and then I say it anyway. Because orange zest is a really strong flavor, but this is a case in which you want that. So I'm going to take just 2 tablespoons of this orange sugar for the dough. The dough itself is not going to be super sweet. The sweetness is going to come from that spiral of filling and then the glaze on top that's also going to soak into the rolls. Some all-purpose flour. So this is 1 2/3 cup, and then I'll use the whisk to level it off. All of your lift here is coming from the baking powder, and we're going to add salt. If you've ever tried to bake anything, especially anything remotely bready, and you've left out the salt, it's super unpleasant. So I'm just whisking to get, again, that orange brown sugar all mixed up, and also to make sure there are no clumps of that baking powder and no clumps of salt, so that you have a really even rise. The main difference between this dough and a classic orange roll and cinnamon roll dough is that it's not yeasted, and so what you're doing instead is creating a short dough which comes together much more quickly, and that's the kind of dough that you have for biscuits, for pies, and that's where you're cutting fats into the flour. So what you always need to start with is cold cubed butter, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to coat all of the fat in the flour. Now my secret ingredient for this dough, I actually add cold cream cheese to the dough too. It just makes it a little more supple than your classic biscuit or scone dough. So I'm taking these hunks of butter and cream cheese that are coated in dough, and I'm just gently smushing and pressing and pushing away at the same time. I don't want a flaky dough, I want a really tender roll. And so I want as much of the dry ingredients to be just combined with fatty ingredients as possible. Once all of the fat is really well incorporated, then you want to add your wet ingredients to form the dough. So I've added the cold milk all at once, and I'm just going to take a fork to gently and really quickly get the flour incorporated into that milk to create a dough. The more fat and liquid you have in that dough, the more tender those rolls are going to be. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to spread it out. You can see this is way too, you can't flatten that out. So we're going to just pop this in the fridge, and that's going to help it firm up. So I have an 8-inch buttered cake pan here. It's really generously buttered, and the dough that's been chilling, so now it's going to be really nice and firm and then much easier to work with. Because this dough is pretty sticky, you still want to flour your surface, and depending on how long it's been chilling, so the longer it's in the freezer, the less flour you need. And I'm actually just going to start by patting it into a rectangle, and ultimately I want to roll it into a 12 by 5 rectangle. But it's always easier to roll if you start by shaping the shape. If you start by shaping the shape, making the shape that you ultimately want to roll it in. So I want to just go gently over the dough with any sort of short dough for biscuits, scones, pie dough. The more force you apply to it, the tougher it's going to be. If these were cinnamon rolls that were yeasted, you could absolutely roll them with a little more vigor but not so much these short doughs. You don't have to use a ruler, but there is a nice assurance that you're going to get equal size rolls that way. All right, so now this dough is ready to have the filling spread on it. So I have my butter here that's been softened, and it's been softened so much that it's like the consistency of mayonnaise, and that's what you want. I like to dollop the butter evenly over the surface just to make it easier to spread. And this is an offset spatula, which is super helpful if you're into baking. Watch, spreading so smoothly. And you want just a thin layer of butter to cover the whole surface. If you had not enough, then the filling has nothing to stick to. And then I'm going to sprinkle this orange spiced sugar. So I added a mix of cardamom and cinnamon to mine. And I like to start by spreading it in the middle just so you don't have too much sugar spilling out. And the nice thing about this mixture is that it actually has some moisture from the orange zest and from the brown sugar, so it makes it easier to spread into this even layer. All right, so once the sugar is evenly spread out, then I'm gonna pat it into the butter just to make sure it's all stuck there. So if the dough doesn't just like lift right off the surface, I use this bench scraper to give it a little nudge to help it get going. And I start by just folding in the edge. So you're just rolling this up as you would any cinnamon roll. I used to use this phrase when writing recipes, where I would say, roll it up like a sleeping bag, right? Because you're rolling. But a recipe tester, one of our recipe testers, Caroline, thank you, Caroline, very helpfully pointed out that this is not the direction in which you would roll a sleeping bag. And she's so right. So you don't want to roll it like a sleeping bag. Again, handy dandy ruler. We're just cutting these into 1.5 inch thick slices. And the reason I'm using a serrated knife and using this little sawing motion is because that's going to give you the lovely spiral. If you don't do that, you're just going to instead have a really like smushed spiral if you try to just use a regular knife and cut straight down. So you start with one in the center, and then you leave about 1/2 inch around that center one, and then you space the rest of them evenly around. So I can feel this dough is actually still cold. You actually want the dough to still feel cold when it goes into the oven, because that will actually help the dough cook more nicely and hold its structure better. So we are just going to throw these right in the oven. All right, so the orange rolls are baking, and we're gonna make the glaze while they bake. We're gonna just use a little bit of cream cheese, and again, you wanna make sure it's soft because you're gonna be smushing it. And I don't like my glazes too sweet, but you can always make it sweeter later. The thing that makes these really orangey is zesting the orange again directly into this sugar. So we have that freshly zested orange in the dough and in the filling, and now we're doing the same thing where we're getting all of these fragrant orange oils right into the sugar. The zest is basically going to also tint your glaze, so you want to make sure that you have an orange that's not too pale if you're going for a really brilliant orange color. If you don't like a cream cheese glaze, I don't understand you or like know who doesn't like that, but you could just do confectioner's sugar, orange zest, and orange juice. And this is a place where you can be forceful. So like this whole time you've been like gentle with the dough and gentle with the rolling, and now you can be like, "Urgh." The way to see whether these are done is actually by pressing them. So I can see how that's just bouncing back a tiny bit, and that's what you're looking for. And this might look like a lot of glaze, and I'll be honest, it sort of is, and that's the point. Just use a spatula to go ahead and spread it so that it runs down the sides and it shows off the middle. So you can't eat them quite yet because they're super hot, but we're just gonna let them cool a little bit longer and then we can eat them. All right, so I have a warm orange roll here ready to taste, and I have a fork, which I'm not gonna use. I love to pick up these rolls and then basically either tear them apart or start to unwind them. When I bite into it, I get that filling right away. I don't know if you're like an outside of the cinnamon roll person or the inside, but these orange rolls, you really get the best of both worlds, because the outsides you have this like crustiness from the pan, and the bottoms of all of them have that caramelized sugar, but the inside, that's where it's so tender and so sweet with that extra bit of filling. You know, sometimes you eat something and it tastes nostalgic even though there's no personal nostalgia, there's just something so homey and comforting. But whether or not you had these growing up or whether you have any nostalgia for orange rolls, you definitely want to try these.